My parents gave my brother a house and a vintage car for his birthday while I got an empty watch box as a joke. I've never been good at telling my own story. It's weird when you grow up as the other twin. You get used to living in someone else's shadow. But now, looking back at everything that happened, I guess my story is actually worth telling. It was 1999, and while everyone was freaking out about Y2K, I was in my grandfather's garage, trying to coax life back into a beat-up 1970 Dodge Challenger that hadn't run in years. The cassette player was blasting Muddy Waters while Grandpa Henry nodded along, his weather hands showing me how to replace a carburetor. "Hand me that wrench, Jake," he'd say, tapping his foot to the rhythm. That garage was my sanctuary. It smelled like motor oil, old leather, and freedom. Tyler, my twin brother, was out winning another football game, probably with his cheerleader girlfriend screaming his name from the sidelines. Meanwhile, I was elbow deep in engine grease, and honestly, I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else. Our suburb in Ohio was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone knew I was a disappointing half of the Mitchell twins. Tyler was a golden boy, quarterback, straight A student, prom king material. I was the weird kid who collected vinyl records and spent too much time with his eccentric grandfather. "Jake, when are you going to join a team or something?" Mom would ask at dinner, while Dad nodded in agreement. Tyler's coach says he's got real potential for a scholarship. Tyler would smirk from across the table, mouth full of mashed potatoes. Maybe Vintage Loser here could join the AV club? They probably need someone who knows how to operate a record player. Mom and Dad would try not to laugh, but they always did, just a little. Our parents were poster children for suburban success. Mom taught English at our high school. Dad managed a local bank branch. They had their American dream all mapped out, complete with 2 identical sons. Except we weren't identical where it counted. The only person who seemed to think I wasn't a disappointment was Grandpa Henry. He'd traveled all over the country in his younger days, had stories about every stop along Route 66, and kept a collection of blues records that would make a music store jealous. "Your brother wouldn't know good music if it hit him in the ear," Grandpa would say, carefully placing a vinyl on his turntable. "Kid probably thinks Bluetooth is some kind of dental condition." He'd laugh at his own jokes, his Rolex glinting on his wrist. That watch fascinated me. A vintage Submariner he kept in a hand-carved wooden box when he wasn't wearing it. He'd bought it in 1965 with his first real paycheck. "Never took out a loan in my life," he'd boast. After Tyler's state championship game, where he scored the winning touchdown, of course, our house smelled like Mom's apple pie and echoed with congratulations calls. I slipped out and rode my bike to Grandpa's house. He was on the porch, smoking his pipe, the smoke curling into the evening air. His TV with its rabbit ear antenna was off. He preferred the sounds of the neighborhood and his old radio. "The conquering hero return home?" he asked as I dropped onto the porch step beside him. "Yeah, Dad's already talking about framing the newspaper article." Grandpa just nodded, puffing on his pipe. Inside his house, everything was vintage. Not because it was trendy, but because he'd never seen a reason to replace things that still worked. His fridge hummed loudly. The couch had an indent shaped exactly like him, and photographs from his travels lined every wall. "Your dad was never much for appreciating history," Grandpa said suddenly. "Always wanted the newest things. I guess Tyler takes after him that way." I nodded, picking at a loose thread on my flannel shirt, another thing Tyler mocked me for wearing. "Mom says I probably won't get into any good colleges." I admitted, the words bitter in my mouth. Not like Tyler. "She thinks I should look at community college or trade school." Grandpa's face darkened, his bushy eyebrows drawing together like thunderclouds. "Did she now? And what exactly is wrong with a kid who can take apart an engine and put it back together? Who understands the value of things that were built to last?" I shrugged. Not enough extracurriculars. No sports. Wrong kind of hobbies. Grandpa tapped his pipe against the porch railing, sparks falling like tiny meteors. "You listen to me, Jake. Life isn't about fitting into someone else's idea of success. Those colleges don't know what they're missing." He looked at me intently, those blue eyes still sharp despite his 78 years. "I've been thinking about my will, you know. Your father, I love him, but he wouldn't know what to do with half the things I value, wouldn't recognize their worth. What do you mean? I asked, surprised by the sudden change in topic. Grandpa's expression was serious now. My old will leaves everything to your father. I always thought he'd be fair. Make sure both his sons were provided for equally. But watching how they treat you compared to Tyler, he shook his head. I'm not so sure anymore. It doesn't matter, Grandpa, I said, though it did. It matters to me, he insisted. Your father won't handle my legacy right. He won't distribute things fairly. I need to change things. Make sure you're not left with nothing. The next day at school, Tyler was being celebrated in the cafeteria. Someone had made a banner with his jersey number on it. I sat alone, eating a sandwich and reading a book about classic car restoration. Hey, vintage loser, Tyler called, surrounded by his teammates. Dad says you missed dinner last night to hang out with the old man again. What do you guys even do there? Listen to dinosaur music and talk about the good old days before electricity. His friends laughed, and a few looked embarrassed for me. I just turned the page of my book. That afternoon, I was back in Grandpa's garage. The Challenger was coming along. We'd rebuilt the transmission, and were working on the electrical system next. Your mom called me today. Grandpa said casually, testing a connection, so I shouldn't be encouraging your impractical interests. That I should be pushing you towards something with a future, like they're doing with Tyler. My stomach tightened. What did you say? Told her I'd lived long enough to know the difference between what lasts and what's just shiny for a moment. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked his workbench, pulling out a drawer. I watched as he carefully placed his wooden Rolex box inside, pushing it to the back. Sometimes people don't see value until it's too late, he said, closing the drawer. I aim to make sure that doesn't happen with you. I didn't think much of it at the time. Grandpa was always saying cryptic things like that, little nuggets of wisdom wrapped in mystery. It was just his way. Later that night, we sat on his porch again. The spring air was cool, fireflies were starting to appear, and Sonny Boy Williamson played softly from his old radio. You know, Jake, I've been thinking, you're not the second of anything. You're not Tyler's twin or the other Mitchell boy. You're the first and only Jake Mitchell, the first in your own story. I looked away, suddenly finding it hard to swallow. No one had ever put it quite like that before. Life's a road, Jake, he continued, looking out at the darkening street. You don't stop driving just because the tank feels empty. You find another way to keep moving forward. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In that moment, for the first time, I felt like someone really saw me, not as a reflection of someone else, but as myself. A week later, everything changed. I was in school when the office called me down. Mom was waiting, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. It's Grandpa. He's had a heart attack. They've taken him to Memorial Hospital. The next hours were a blur. Tyler was pulled from baseball practice. Dad left the bank. We all converged on the hospital, that sterile antiseptic place that smelled nothing like motor oil or old vinyl. Grandpa looked small in a hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting him to beeping machines. His Rolex was gone, replaced by a plastic hospital bracelet. The doctors say it was a major cardiac event. Dad explained, using the formal language he always fell back on during crises. They're doing everything they can. Mom and Dad stepped out to talk to the doctor. Tyler sat uncomfortably in a corner chair, scrolling through his phone. This sucks, he muttered, but his heart wasn't in it. I sat beside Grandpa's bed and took his hand. It felt lighter somehow, as if something essential had already begun to leave him. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with effort. Jake, he whispered, his voice barely there. I'm here, Grandpa, I said, leaning closer. Rolex. He breathed. The box for you. His eyes closed again, his breathing becoming more labored. I thought he was confused, the delirium that sometimes comes at the end. What did his watch have to do with anything? The monitors began to beat more urgently. Nurses rushed in, a doctor right behind them. Someone pulled me away from bed. You need to step outside now, they said firmly. I stood in the hallway, watching through the glass as they worked on him. Tyler appeared beside me, for once not knowing what to say. Dad put his arm around Mom's shoulders as she cried quietly. After 20 minutes that felt like forever, the doctor came out, his face telling us everything before he spoke a word. I'm very sorry. We did everything we could. They let us say goodbye. I went last, standing beside the still form that no longer looked like my grandpa. The machines were silent now. The room felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with the number of people in it. I thought about all the wisdom Grandpa had tried to pass on to me, about roads and journeys, and being the first in my own story, about things of value that others couldn't see. His last words echoed in my mind about his Rolex and its box, but it didn't make sense. Why would that matter now? It was probably just confusion, his mind wandering as it shut down. I stood there, feeling hollow. There would be no reading like in the movies. Dad had already mentioned that Grandpa hadn't updated his will in years. Everything would go to him, as the only child. As I left the hospital room, I felt like I was leaving more than just my grandfather behind. I was leaving the one place where I felt valued for being exactly who I was. I didn't know then that Grandpa Henry had left me something far more valuable than I could have imagined. Something hidden in plain sight. Something that would change everything. The week after Grandpa Henry died was a blur of black clothes and casseroles. People I barely knew kept squeezing my shoulder and saying things like, "He's in a better place now," or, "At least he lived a full life," as if that was supposed to make me feel better. The funeral was exactly what Grandpa would have hated, stuffy, formal, with the pastor talking about a man he'd never actually met. No blues music, no stories about cross-country road trips, nothing about his passion for things with history and character. Just generic platitudes about returning to our Maker. Tyler wore his Letterman jacket under his suit coat. Even in mourning, he had to make sure everyone remembered he was a star athlete. 3 days after we put Grandpa on the ground, we all gathered in our living room with Mr. Peterson, the family lawyer. He was a golf buddy of Dad's, one of those guys with permanently sunburned cheeks and a country club membership card always visible in his wallet. "The will is quite straightforward," Mr. Peterson said, adjusting his glasses. "Henry Mitchell leaves all his worldly possessions, including the house at 1420 Maple Street, the 1970 Dodge Challenger automobile, and all personal effects including his Rolex Submariner watch, to his son, William Mitchell." Dad nodded solemnly, like he was accepting a grave responsibility instead of a free house and classic car. Mom squeezed his hand supportively. I just sat there, feeling hollow but not surprised. Grandpa had told me he wanted to change his will, but obviously he never got around to it. Maybe he thought he had more time. Don't we all? I kept thinking about his last words to me. "Rolex box for you?" I'd assumed it was just delirium, the random firing of synapses as his brain shut down. After the meeting, I walked through Grandpa's empty house one last time. Dad had already started making plans to sell it. The garage felt especially empty without the Challenger, which Dad had already moved to our house for safekeeping. I kept thinking about Grandpa's last words about the Rolex. He probably wanted me to have that watch, something to remember him by, but it was too late now. Dad had already claimed it as his own, wearing it proudly on his wrist during the funeral like some kind of trophy. Life went on, in that way it has of not caring whether you're ready for it to or not. A month passed. Tyler and I turned 18. Mom organized a backyard party for our birthday, though anyone could see it was really Tyler's party that I happened to be included in. Red and white balloons, our school colors, tied to the deck railing, burgers sizzling on the grill, and Backstreet Boys blasting from the speakers. All of Tyler's football buddies were there, along with what seemed like half the school's cheerleading squad. My invite list consisted of exactly 0 people. Not that I'd had anyone to invite. I wasn't exactly Mr. Popular, and my only real friend had been Grandpa. I stood awkwardly by the snack table, watching Tyler hold court by the pool, telling some story that had everyone in stitches. The sun was setting, turning the sky the exact same shade of orange as our school mascot, because of course it would. "All right, everyone," Mom called out, clapping her hands. Time for presents. The crowd gathered around a patio table, where gifts were stacked in 2 piles. Tyler's mountain of colorfully wrapped packages dwarfed my small collection of obligatory gifts from relatives. Tyler went first, tearing through his presents with the enthusiasm of a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. New sneakers, video games, a leather jacket that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Then came the big surprise. Dad stepped forward with a small envelope. "Son, your mother and I are so proud of you. Your grandfather would have wanted you to have this." Tyler opened the envelope, pulling out a set of keys and a folded document. His eyes widened. "No way. For real?" Dad nodded, beaming. "The deed to Grandpa's house and the keys to the Challenger. All yours, champ." The crowd erupted in applause. Someone whistled. Tyler's girlfriend squealed and threw her arms around him. I stood there frozen, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. The house where I'd spent countless hours learning about engines and life, the car that Grandpa and I had painstakingly restored together, all handed to Tyler, who couldn't even change his own oil if his life depended on it. But I kept my face neutral. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. "And now for Jake," Mom said, her voice noticeably less enthusiastic. She handed me a few small packages. Socks from Aunt Carol, a gift card to Walmart from Uncle Steve, a generic birthday card from my parents with $50 inside. "Thanks," I mumbled, stuffing everything into my pocket. Dad stepped forward again, this time with a small wrap box. His eyes had that gleam they got when he thought he was being particularly clever. "Jake, buddy, we got you something special too," he said, his voice a little too loud. Tyler and a few of his friends exchanged glances, barely containing their smirks. I took the box, immediately recognizing the shape and size. My heart skipped. Could it be? Had Dad actually decided to give me Grandpa's Rolex after all? The wrapping paper came off to reveal the familiar wooden box with the Rolex Crown logo on top. The exact same box I'd watched Grandpa tuck away in his drawer that day in the garage. My hands were actually trembling as I opened it. Maybe Grandpa had gotten through Dad somehow. Maybe there was some justice in the world after all. The lid creaked open. For a split second, I saw the velvet interior. Empty, and then bang! A spring-loaded confetti cannon exploded right in my face, showering me with tiny pieces of colored paper. The entire backyard erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "Got him good!" I heard the distinctive click and whir of Dad's camcorder. "You're our special boy too, Jake." Dad chuckled, zooming in on my face covered in confetti. Tyler sauntered over, slinging an arm around my shoulders, making sure to squeeze just a little too hard. "Confetti looks good on you, bro." He held up his wrist, where Grandpa's Rolex gleamed in the sunset. "Dad gave me this last week. Pretty sweet, huh?" I could feel something breaking inside me, the last thread of whatever had tied me to this family. "Thanks for the awesome gift," I said flatly, closing the box and tucking under my arm. I walked away before anyone could see the look on my face. In my room, I threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed the cash I'd saved from mowing lawns, and waited until the party noise died down and the house went quiet. At 2 a.m., I slipped out the back door, the empty Rolex box stuffed in my bag. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say? The cool night air felt like freedom as I walked through the sleeping neighborhood. I had about $500 saved up, no car, no real plan, just a burning need be anywhere but there. By the time dawn broke, I was at Sunset Trailer Park on the edge of town, a place far enough from our upper-middle-class neighborhood that no one would think to look for me there. The manager, a weathered guy named Lou with tattoos covering both arms, barely looked up from his racing form as I asked about vacancies. "Got ID?" he asked. "Just turned 18, I said, showing him my driver's license. $200 a month. First and last month's rent up front. Utilities included, but the hot water's iffy. Unit 17's open." I counted out $400 in cash, and Lou handed me a key. Plumbing works most days. Keep the noise down after 10. Just like that, I had a place to stay. Not home, not yet, but at least a roof. My new place made our garage look like a palace. Maybe 200 square feet total, with stained carpet that had probably been installed during the Reagan administration. The walls were so thin, I could hear my neighbors snoring on one side and watching game shows on the other. I sat on the sagging twin bed, looking around at my new life. A hot plate, a mini fridge that hummed like it was about to take off, a bathroom sink that dripped no matter how tight I turned the handle. Dinner of champions, I muttered that evening. Eating ramen noodles straight from the pot I bought at Dollar General. My phone had been blowing up all day. I finally turned it on to see dozens of missed calls and messages. Mom. Jake, where are you? This isn't funny. Come home right now. Dad, you're being ridiculous. It was just a joke. Be a man and come home. Tyler, way to ruin the party, drama queen. Mom's freaking out, so nice job. I turned the phone off again. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about how my absence reflected on them. I needed a job, and fast. My savings wouldn't last long. The next morning, I walked to Riverside Auto Shop, where Grandpa had sometimes taken a Challenger for specialized work. The owner, Bob, was a gruff guy in his 50s with perpetually greasy hands and a no-nonsense attitude. Henry's grandson, right? He said when I walked in. Heard about him passing. Damn shame. Good man. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I need a job, sir. I know my way around engines. Grandpa taught me. Bob looked me up and down. High school. Just graduated. Well, close enough. Got my GED last week. He grunted. Start tomorrow. 8 sharp. $7.50 an hour. Prove you know what you're doing. We'll talk about a raise in a month. Just like that, I had a job. It wasn't glamorous, mostly oil changes and tire rotations at first, but it was something. I could pay my rent, buy my ramen, and start putting a little aside. For what? I wasn't sure yet. The first week was tough. I'd turn my phone on at night to find new messages, each more manipulative than the last. Mom went from anger to concern. We're worried sick. Please just let us know you're safe. Dad escalated from irritation to threats. This little tantrum has gone on long enough. If you want to act like an adult, start by facing your family. Tyler remained Tyler. Bet you're enjoying all the attention, huh? Always gotta be the victim, right? I finally sent Mom a short text. I'm fine. I have a job and a place to stay. Don't worry about me. I thought that would give them some peace of mind. Instead, it just changed their approach. Mom, if this is how you want to live your life, so be it. Dad, when you're ready to stop being childish, you know where we are. Tyler, dude's living in a trailer park, LOL. After that, silence. For months, complete radio silence from my family. And honestly, it was a relief. I kept to myself, showed up to work on time, and gradually earned Bob's respect. The shop radio was always tuned to the classic rock station. Not quite blues, but close enough. One day, a guy in an expensive suit brought in his BMW for service. He stood watching me work, a look of vague distaste on his face, like he was afraid the grease might jump off my hands and onto his Italian leather shoes. Did you, time travel here from the 60s or something? He asked, eyeing my flannel shirt and the blues playing from my portable cassette player. I just shrugged. Good music doesn't have an expiration date. About 6 months after I'd left home, I got a single text from Mom. Hope you've grown up a bit. The door is open when you're ready to be part of this family again. As if I was a problem. As if I needed to change to be worthy of their love. I never responded. A few weeks later, I noticed a girl around my age who sometimes came by the shop. She had curly hair that she kept trying to tame with a bandana and a habit of drumming her fingers to whatever was playing on the radio. That's my daughter, Emma, Bob told me one day, catching me watching her as she dropped off lunch for him. She's studying music over at the community college. And before you get any ideas, I own a lot of tools that could double as weapons. I nodded quickly. Yes, sir. No ideas here, sir. But Emma, or Emmy, as she preferred, had other plans. She started showing up more often, asking me questions about the cars I was working on, bringing extra sandwiches by accident. Dad says you're into blues, she said one afternoon, perching on a workbench while I changed spark plugs in Camaro. Not many guys our age appreciate the classics. It turned out Emmy played bass in a band that did blues covers at local bars, places that didn't look too closely at the IDs of the musicians. She talked about music with the same passion Grandpa had talked about engines. One day, she brought me a cassette tape. Made you a mix. Some Muddy Waters, some B.B. King. Even threw in some Stevie Ray Vaughan, though he's practically modern compared to your usual stuff. She handed me the tape, our fingers brushing. Your grandfather would be proud, you know. Dad says he was always talking about his grandson who understood the value of things built to last. Something warm unfurled in my chest. The first genuine good feeling I'd had since Grandpa died. Maybe I wasn't completely alone in the world after all. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into a routine. Work, save money, spend evenings in my tiny trailer listening to Emmy's mixtapes or reading repair manuals. Sometimes I'd go see her band play at a dive bar called the Blue Note. I was surviving, but I wasn't exactly living. I kept the empty Rolex box on my nightstand, a reminder of both what I'd lost and what had been taken from me. Some nights, I lie awake thinking about that last day in the hospital, try and make sense of Grandpa's final words. What had he been trying to tell me about the box? Was it just the ramblings of a dying man, or something more? I'd turn the box over my hands, feeling the smooth wood, running my fingers along the seams. It was well-crafted, solid mahogany with carefully carved wooden hinges, the Rolex crown logo inlaid in a slightly darker wood on the lid. I placed it back on the nightstand and stared at the water stain on my ceiling. Tomorrow will be another day of oil changes and tire rotations. Another day of trying to figure out what came next in a life that had veered so far off course. I cherished that empty box, as worthless as it seemed to everyone else. It was all I had left of the person who had truly seen me for who I was, who had believed in me when no one else did. Maybe that was enough for now. But for now, I closed my eyes, the sound of the trailer park, a distant TV, someone's engine turning over, the hum of the ancient refrigerator, lulling me towards sleep. Tomorrow was just going to be another day. Or so I thought. It's amazing how quickly routine can become a life preserver when everything else has been swept away. Wake up, shower in lukewarm water because the trailer park's water heater was temperamental at best. Grab coffee from the diner across the street. Work at the shop, come home, eat something that probably came from a can, sleep, repeat. A year passed this way. One full trip around the sun since Grandpa Henry died, since my family showed their true colors, since I walked out. The seasons changed, but my days remained largely the same. I had a rhythm now, a life I'd built from scratch. Bob had given me 3 raises. I was now the shop's go-to guy for electrical problems. Turns out I had inherited Grandpa's knack for understanding how current flows through a system. The other mechanics would call me over when they were stumped by a faulty sensor or mysterious dashboard light. I'd saved almost $8,000. Not enough for college yet, but getting there. Community college was looking like a real possibility. Within another year, I'd upgraded from my sagging twin bed to a slightly less saggaful mattress and invested in a coffee maker, so I could save the $3 a day I'd been spending at the diner. My trailer was still a shoebox, but it was my shoebox. I'd hung a few posters, classic cars and blues musicians, and installed shelves of my small but growing collection of auto repair books. The morning everything change started like any other. October in Ohio had a particular smell, decaying leaves and wood smoke, with just a hint of impending frost. I woke up shivering because the ancient heating system in my trailer had decided to take the day off. The coffee maker gurgled and sputtered, filling the tiny space with the aroma of cheap but necessary caffeine. My old radio played Muddy Waters' I'm Ready, crackling through the single working speaker. I was fiddling with the wiring in my bathroom, trying to figure out why the overhead light kept flickering. I bought a basic metal detector from a pawn shop for $20. Not for treasure hunting, but because it was a useful tool for finding wires hidden in walls. Saved a lot of accidental holes that way. The detector was nothing fancy, just a handheld wand with a small screen that beeped when it found metal. I ran it along the wall, listening for the telltale sound that would guide me to the faulty connection. As I moved back toward my nightstand to grab a screwdriver, the detector passed over Grandpa's Rolex box. I wasn't even paying attention. My mind was on voltage readings and wire gauges, when sharp, insistent beeping pierced my concentration. I froze, confused. The wooden box was just that, wooden. The detector shouldn't have reacted to it at all. Maybe it was picking up a nail in the nightstand? I moved the wand away, and the beeping stopped. I passed it over the nightstand. Nothing. But when I hovered it directly over the Rolex box, it went crazy again. What the hell? I muttered, setting down the detector and picking up the box. I'd had it for a year now, had turned it over in my hands countless times. It had become a sort of ritual on bad days, holding this last connection to Grandpa, running my fingers over the smooth wood, remembering his voice, his wisdom, his belief in me. But now, looking at it with new eyes, I wondered, was there more to this box than I thought? Grandpa's last words echoed in my head. Rolex box for you? Not the watch. The box. Heart pounding. I examined it more carefully than I ever had before. The craftsmanship was impeccable, with no visible seams except for the hinges and the lid closure. But when I tapped the bottom, it sounded different from the sides, more hollow. Somehow, my hands were shaking as I gently pressed and prodded every inch of the wood, looking for a catch, a button, anything. And then there it was, a barely perceptible indent in one corner of the bottom panel. I pressed it with my thumb and heard a soft click. The bottom of the box slid open about half an inch, revealing a hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, nestled in a small velvet pouch, was a coin, gold, gleaming even in the dim light of my trailer. I carefully tipped it into my palm. It was surprisingly heavy, with a beautiful design, a woman in flowing robes walking forward, holding a torch and olive branch. Behind her, the Capitol Dome. On the other side, an eagle in flight. The date caught my eye immediately, 1933. Encircling the edge, the words United States of America and $20. I didn't know much about coins, but this one practically radiated importance. It seemed, too, significant to be just a collector's item, and Grandpa had hidden it, had tried to tell me about it with his dying breath. With trembling fingers, I reached for my laptop, a refurbished model from 5 years ago that sounded like a jet engine when it ran for more than 10 minutes. While it wheezed a life, I kept staring at the coin, turning it over and over, watching how the light caught the intricate engravings. Finally, I typed 1933 gold $20 coin into the search bar. The results nearly stopped my heart. 1933 St. Gaudens Double Eagle, the world's most valuable coin. Rare 1933 Double Eagle sells for record $15 million. The Forbidden Coin, the story of the 1933 Double Eagle. I clicked the first link, then the second, then opened every result on the first page. My eyes grew wider with each paragraph I read. Long story short, in 1933, the U.S. Mint produced nearly 500,000 of these Double Eagle coins. But before they could be released, President Roosevelt took the country off the gold standard, and all the coins were ordered to be melted down. Only a handful survived, most of them stolen from the mint. For decades, the government seized any 1933 Double Eagles that surfaced. They were considered government property, stolen goods. But in 2002, the Treasury Department made a special arrangement to auction one, just one, legally. It sold for millions. And in recent years, another legally cleared coin had sold for $15 million, making it one of the most valuable coins in the world. I looked back at the golden disc in my hand, my mouth dry. If this was genuine, if this is fake, I'm officially cursed. I whispered to my empty trailer. And if it's real, I couldn't even finish the thought. It was too enormous to process. I needed a second opinion, someone I could trust. I carefully replaced the coin in its velvet pouch, tucked it into the secret compartment, and secured the box in my backpack. Then I drove straight to the shop, even though it was my day off. Emmy was there, helping her dad with the books. Over the past year, We become close, not quite dating, but something more than friends. She looked up when I walked in. Her smile turned concern when she saw my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, setting down her pen. I glanced around to make sure we were alone, then carefully extracted the box from my backpack. "Remember my grandfather's Rolex box? The one my family used for that stupid confetti prank." She nodded, her expression darkening slightly. She'd heard the whole story by now, had been appropriately outraged on my behalf. "There's something inside it, something hidden." Bob walked in as I was showing Emmy the secret compartment. He was wiping his hands on a shop rag, leaving behind smears of engine grease. "What's going on?" he asked, eyebrows raised our huddled, conspiratorial posture. I hesitated only a moment before deciding that if I could trust Emmy, I could trust her father too. I explained about finding the hidden compartment in the box, then carefully extracted the velvet pouch. Both their eyes widened as I gently tipped the coin into my palm. "Is that what I think it is?" Bob asked, leaning in for a closer look. "It's a 1933 double eagle," I confirmed. "At least, I think it is. I've been reading about them online. If it's real..." I swallowed hard. "One of these sold for $15 million recently." Emmy made a strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "You're either a millionaire or you're holding a very expensive paperweight." Bob frowned, adjusting his glasses. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hand. I passed him the coin, feeling oddly reluctant to let it go even for a moment. He examined it carefully, turning it over, testing its weight. Gold has a specific feel to it. "This feels right. The craftsmanship looks genuine, but I'm no expert." He handed it back to me. "You need to get this authenticated professionally." "How do I do that?" I asked. "There's an auction house in New York, Sotheby's," Bob said. "They have experts who can verify if this is a real deal. If it is..." He let out a low whistle. "Your grandfather left you one hell of a nest egg, son. I can't believe he hid this in a box that was literally sitting on his workbench," I said, carefully returning the coin to its pouch. All this time, Emmy was shaking her head in amazement. "You look like you found pirate treasure or something." I laughed, but it came out slightly hysterical. "I think I did, just without the parrot and eye patch." Bob was already at his computer, typing away. "I'm looking up Sotheby's contact information. You need to call them, set up an appointment. This isn't something you want to trust to just any coin dealer." My mind was racing, trying to process the implications. If this coin was genuine, if it could actually sell for even a fraction of what the articles claimed. "I need to sit down," I muttered, dropping onto a nearby stool. Emmy squeezed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I'm just processing," I replied. "A year ago I was eating ramen and counting penny for laundry. And now..." Bob looked up from his computer. "Don't count your millions yet. First, we need to make sure it's authentic. Second, there could be legal complications. Those coins have a complicated history." I nodded, trying to temper my expectations, but it was hard not to dream. 2 days later, I was on a Greyhound bus to New York City, the Rolex box tucked securely in an inner pocket of my jacket. I couldn't afford a plane ticket. Those are for rich people, which I'm not. Yet, I joked to Emmy before leaving. The bus ride was long and uncomfortable, with a kid kicking the back of my seat for at least half the journey. But I barely noticed. My mind was too busy running wild with possibilities. If the coin was real, if it could be legally sold, I could go to college. Not just community college, but a real university. I could study engineering, maybe even open my own restoration shop someday. As the Manhattan skyline came into view, I felt a knot in my stomach. I'd never been to New York before. The sheer scale of it was intimidating. Endless towers of glass and steel stretching toward the sky. The bus dropped me at Port Authority, and I emerged into a cacophony of honking horns, shouting vendors, and a constant rush of people moving in every direction at once. I clutched my jacket closer, feeling the reassuring weight of the box against my chest. I had an appointment at Sotheby's at 2 p.m. It had taken some convincing over the phone. They didn't typically see people without referrals. But when I mentioned potential 1933 Double Eagle, their tone had changed dramatically. The auction house was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected something ostentatious, dripping with luxury. Instead, it was understated, elegant in a way that suggested they didn't need to show off to prove their worth. I felt painfully out of place in my Walmart jeans and flannel shirt. Everyone else wore clothing that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But I squared my shoulders, thinking of Grandpa's words. "You're the first in your own story." A receptionist directed me to a private consultation room, where a gray-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit waited. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Harrison Wells, senior numismatic specialist," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, trying not to seem as nervous as I felt. "Thank you for seeing me. You mentioned on the phone that you might have a 1933 Double Eagle? I must tell you, these are extraordinarily rare. Most claimed discoveries turn out to be replicas or other years with altered dates." I nodded, carefully reaching into my jacket. It belonged to my grandfather. He kept it hidden in a secret compartment in this box. Mr. Wells's expression remained professionally neutral as I removed the velvet pouch and gently placed a coin on the felt pad he prepared on the table. But I caught the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible catch in his breath. He reached for a magnifying glass and a pair of white cotton gloves, donning them before carefully picking up the coin. The room fell silent except for the soft tick of a clock on the wall as he examined it from every angle. Finally, he set it down and looked at me with new intensity. "Mr. Mitchell, I'd like to bring in a colleague to confirm, but based on my initial examination, this appears to be genuine." The words hit me like a physical force. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "However," he continued, "there are significant legal considerations. As you may know, these coins have a complicated history with the Treasury Department. We would need to establish provenance, how your grandfather came to possess it, and whether it can be legally sold." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's the next step?" "With your permission, we'd like to conduct a thorough authentication process. This would include metallurgical analysis, detailed photography, and comparison with known specimens. We would also begin discussions with our legal team about establishing proper provenance." "How long would that take?" I asked. "For an item of the significance? At least several weeks. Possibly longer if we need to liaise with government agencies." I thought about the long bus ride home, about returning to my job at the shop, about the waiting and uncertainty that stretched ahead. But I also thought about Grandpa Henry, about how he'd hidden this treasure from me, his final gift. "He knew," I whispered. "Pardon?" Mr. Wells asked. "My grandfather. He knew what this coin was worth. He knew it would change my life." Mr. Wells smiled slightly. "Based on what little I know of the story, it seems your grandfather was a man of foresight and wisdom." I carefully placed the coin back in its velvet pouch, then handed it to Mr. Wells for safekeeping during the authentication process. The auction house provided me with detailed receipts and security protocols. I signed several forms, my signature looking childish and awkward next to the crisp letterhead. As I prepared to leave, Mr. Wells shook my hand again. "If this authentication proceeds as I expect it will, Mr. Mitchell, you may want to consider financial and legal advisors. Life can change rather dramatically when assets of this magnitude are involved." I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of it all. This wasn't just about money. It was about responsibility, about honoring what Grandpa had entrusted to me. Now, sitting in the waiting area while final paperwork was prepared, I found myself thinking of him, his hands weathered from years of work, his eyes bright with stories from the road, his unwavering belief that I mattered, that I was valuable, that I was the first in my own story. "You knew, didn't you, Grandpa?" I whispered to myself. "You always knew I'd figured out. The coin that had been hidden in plain sight all this time. The future he'd secured for me when everyone else had written me off. The faith he'd had in me to make something of myself, to build a life worth living." My palms were sweating, my heart racing. In a few weeks, I might be a millionaire. Or this could all fall apart, due to some obscure Treasury regulation. The uncertainty was almost too much to bear. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Grandpa, if this is real, I promise I won't waste it. I won't let you down." The door opened, and a staff member approached with a folder of documents. My journey with this coin, with Grandpa's legacy, was just beginning. Whatever happened next would change my life forever. But sitting there in that auction house, surrounded by wealth and history, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. The solid ground of possibility beneath my feet, and the open road of the future stretching out before me. The following 6 weeks were the longest of my life. I went back to Ohio, back to the shop, back to my tiny trailer, but everything felt temporary now, like I was living in a waiting room rather than a life. Bob and Emmy were the only ones who knew what was happening. We'd sworn each other to secrecy. If word got out about the coin, especially my family, well, I wasn't ready for that particular storm. Every couple of days, I'd get a brief, professional update from Sotheby's. Authentication proceeding as expected. Legal team reviewing documentation. Treasury Department consultation underway. Each message simultaneously lifted my hopes and twisted my stomach into knots. I tried not to build castles in the air, but it was impossible not to dream. Late at night, staring at the water stain on my ceiling, I'd map out possibilities. College, a real house, maybe a shop of my own someday. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Harrison Wells from Sotheby's. I'm pleased to inform you that our authentication process is complete and your 1933 Double Eagle has been verified as genuine." I had to sit down, right there on the grease-stained floor of the shop. Furthermore, our legal team has established a clear provenance. Based on markings specific to this coin and our research into Treasury Department records, we've confirmed it was legally released before the Gold Reserve Act restrictions. The Treasury Department has acknowledged our findings and cleared the coin for private sale. "The coin predates the government seizures," Mr. Wells explained. "And while most 1933 Double Eagles were indeed illegally removed from the mint, a very small number were legitimately sold before the Gold Reserve Act took effect. The unique markings on your coin match Treasury Department records of these legal releases. I wasn't entirely following the legal details, but the bottom line was clear. The coin was mine to sell." 2 months later, I was back in New York, watching from a private room as my grandfather's coin was presented at Sotheby's special auction of rare numismatic treasures. The auctioneer's voice became a rhythmic drone as the bidding started at $5 million and quickly escalated. $8 million, $10 million, $12 million. When the hammer finally fell at $14 million, I felt nothing. No euphoria, no excitement. Just a strange numbness, as if this was happening to someone else. Reality didn't hit until a week later, when I got the payment after taxes and fees. $10.2 million. $10 million. More money than I could comprehend. The first person I called was a financial advisor Bob had recommended, someone who specialized in helping people manage sudden wealth. The second call was to Bob himself. "I want to make you a business proposition," I told him. 6 months later, Mitchell and Dalton Classic Restorations opened its doors in a renovated warehouse on the outskirts of town. Bob had agreed to be my partner, bringing his decades of experience and rock-solid reputation. Emmy handled the books and was developing our marketing strategy. We built something special, not just a repair shop, but a full restoration facility specializing in bringing classic American cars back to their former glory. State-of-the-art equipment, 3 experienced mechanics hired from across the state, and a waiting list that already stretched 6 months. I'd taken financial advisor Megan's advice and invested half my windfall conservatively. "Never spend your principal, Jake," she'd warned. The other half was split between the business, a modest 3-bedroom house by Lake Erie, and a college fund for myself. Turns out that having money doesn't automatically solve all your problems. It just gives you a different set to deal with. Taxes became a nightmare. Everyone suddenly needed just a small loan, and the constant worry that I'd make some catastrophic financial mistake kept me up at night sometimes. Emmy was my anchor through it all. She'd look at me with those level eyes of hers whenever I'd start spiraling and say, "Earth to Jake." You're still you. The money isn't. She was right, of course. The money wasn't me. It was just a tool, like a wrench or a screwdriver. What mattered was how I used it. And I was determined to use it to build something my grandfather would be proud of. Grandpa Henry had always said that America's golden age of automobiles was our country's most beautiful contribution to industrial design. These aren't just transportation. He'd tell me as we worked on the Challenger. They're rolling sculptures, Jake. Art you can drive. I wanted to honor that vision. Our shop didn't just fix old cars. We preserved history, revived stories, breathed life back into dreams that had been parked in barns and garages for decades. About a year after we opened, I had an idea. I set up a YouTube channel to document our restorations, talking through the process, the history of each vehicle, the stories of the owners. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe a few hundred gearheads who'd appreciate seeing a 1957 Chevy brought back from the dead. But something about it resonated with people. Maybe it was the obvious passion in my voice when I talked about the craftsmanship of these old machines. Maybe it was the satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole again, a metaphor people needed more than I realized. Whatever the reason, Mitchell's Vintage Revival hit 100,000 subscribers within 8 months. Comments poured in from around the world. People shared stories of their grandparents' cars, of road trips in station wagons, of first dates in Mustangs and Camaros. I kept my promise to myself: no flashy clothes, no sports cars, no mansion. I still wore flannel shirts and Walmart jeans to work every day. The only concession to wealth was a reliable pickup truck to replace my rusted-out Honda. You're the only millionaire I know who still eats ramen. Emmy teased one evening as we were closing up the shop. She was sitting on her usual perch, the workbench near my station, swinging her legs as I finished up some paperwork. "It's the shrimp flavor," I replied with mock seriousness. "You can't buy taste like that." She laughed, the sound echoing through the now-empty shop. "So, when are you going to splurge on something? Anything? A vacation? A watch of your own? Something that's not practical or business-related?" I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. "I don't need much. I've got the house, the business, college lineup for next fall." "That's not what I asked, Jake," she said, her voice softer now. "What do you want? Just for you?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For so long, survival had been my only goal. Then the business. I hadn't really thought beyond that. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I'm still figuring that out." 2 weeks later, on a crisp fall evening, I had an answer. I'd been working on a special project in secret. A 1970 Dodge Challenger, the exact model and color as the one Grandpa and I had restored together, the one that now sat in Tyler's garage gathering dust. When I drove it to Emmy's apartment, her eyes widened in recognition. She knew the stories, had seen the old photos. "Is that—" "Not the original," I clarified, but as close as I could get. I'd planned to take her for a drive along the lake, maybe stop for dinner somewhere nice. Simple, low-key, that was our style. But as we cruised down the shoreline, the sunset painting the water gold and crimson, something shifted in me, a certainty I hadn't felt before. "Let's walk on the beach," I suggested, pulling into a scenic overlook. The October air was chilly, but the sky was clear, endless stars emerging as daylight faded. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of waves a gentle rhythm beside us. Then I stopped, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the Rolex box, the same one that had once exploded confetti in my face, the same one that had hidden the coin that changed my life. "I've been thinking about what I want," I said quietly. Emmy looked at the box, then at me, her expression a mix of surprise and something else I couldn't quite name. "I want a partner," I continued, "someone to share the road with, someone who saw value in me when I was nothing but a kid in a trailer park trying to figure out life." I opened the box, revealing not confetti, not a coin, but a ring, simple, elegant, with a small diamond that caught the last light of day. "You're such a vintage romantic," she laughed, but her eyes were shining with tears. She said, "Yes, of course." Later, she admitted she'd been expecting this for months, wondering what was taking me so long. I wanted the moment to be right. I told her, some things you can't rush. 3 months later, we were standing on the back deck of our house by the lake. Winter had transformed the landscape, ice forming along the shoreline, snowflakes drifting lazily down to rest on the bare branches of trees. We should put the wedding money toward the business expansion, Emmy said, leaning against the railing, her engagement ring catching the pale winter sunlight. We're not having the wedding at the shop, I replied firmly. She smirked. You sure? We could decorate the lifts with flowers, use motor oil as cologne. I laughed, pulling her closer against the cold. That was Emmy, practical, unsentimental in many ways, but with a streak of humor that kept me grounded, looking out across the frozen lake. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from a kid living in his twin shadow, to a homeless teenager in a trailer park, to a man building a life he could be proud of. None of it would have happened without Grandpa Henry, his belief in me, his secret gift, his wisdom that still guided me. Penny for your thoughts? Emmy asked, nudging me gently. Just thinking about Grandpa, I said, how he always told me I was the first in my own story, not the second in someone else's. She nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. That was another thing I loved about her. He'd be proud, she said simply, not because of the money or the business, but because you stayed yourself through all of it. Standing there on that deck, with the woman I loved beside me and the future stretching out before us like an open road, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. I did it, Grandpa. I thought, looking out at the horizon where lake met sky. I'm living the way you taught me, valuing what lasts, building something real, being the first in my own story. And somewhere I was sure he knew. Fame wasn't something I'd ever sought, but in our digital age, it's hard to stay anonymous when you go from trailer park to millionaire, especially when your YouTube channel keeps growing and your restoration business gets featured in classic car magazines. I'd been careful about my privacy, never mentioned my full name in videos, kept my personal life separate from the business content. But all it took was one car show in Cleveland where a local news station did a feature on our rising star restoration company. They ran a 2-minute segment showing me working on a 1965 Corvette Stingray, talking about my philosophy of preserving automotive history. The reporter mentioned my full name, the name of our shop, and our location. Within days, the video was circulating online. It was inevitable, I suppose, that my family would eventually find out. After 3 years of silence, I wasn't even thinking about them anymore. They belonged to another life, one I'd left behind the night of my 18th birthday. The message appeared in my business email inbox on a Tuesday morning. Jake, saw you on Channel 8. We need to talk. Dad, short and to the point, just like him. No congratulations, no apology, nothing but a demand. I showed it to Emmy, who frowned. Are you going to respond? She asked, her hand finding mine. I didn't answer for several days. What was there to say? The life I'd built had no space for people who'd seen me as nothing but a disappointment, who'd turned my last connection to my grandfather into a joke. But curiosity is a powerful force. What did they want? Money, almost certainly. Still, a small part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, they'd had a change of heart. Emmy, wiser than me as usual, suggested neutral ground. If you're going to meet them, do it somewhere public. I picked Grove Cafe, a place downtown where the ambient noise would prevent any scene from becoming too disruptive. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and chose a corner table with a clear view of the door. They came in as a unit, Mom, Dad, Tyler. Time had left its marks. Mom's hair had more gray, Dad's middle had expanded, and Tyler had lost some of the athletic swagger of his youth. They spotted me and approached, faces a mix of uncertainty and calculation. Jake, Mom said, sliding into the booth across from me. You look, well. Dad nodded stiffly. Son. Tyler hung back slightly, suddenly finding the ceiling tiles fascinating. An awkward silence stretched between us. 3 years of absence compressing into the space of a coffee shop table. You wanted to talk, I finally said, neither hostile nor welcoming. just stating a fact. We saw you on TV, Dad began, leaning forward. The business looks successful. We're proud of you. The words sounded rehearsed, hollow. 3 years ago, they might have meant something to me. That hungry, desperate kid who just wanted his family's approval. Now they rang as false as a counterfeit coin. Thanks, I replied, taking a sip of coffee. Is that all you wanted to say? Mom shot Dad a look. This wasn't going according to their script. We've been worried about you, Mom tried, her voice taking on that concerned teacher tone she perfected over decades in the classroom. You just disappeared. We didn't know if you were safe, if you needed help. I texted you that I was fine. I interrupted, and you said, and I quote, "If this is how you want to live your life, so be it." Her cheeks flushed. We were upset. You can understand that, surely. I said nothing, just waited. Dad cleared his throat. We saw the house in your Instagram photos. And that Challenger you restored looks just like Grandpa Henry's. Business must be doing very well. There was the gentle probe about finances. I've been fortunate, I said neutrally. Tyler finally spoke up. Fortunate? Come on, Jake. Nobody goes from trailer park to lakefront property in 3 years just being fortunate. What's the real story? I looked at my brother, my twin, my genetic mirror, yet someone who might as well have been a stranger. You really want to know? I asked, feeling a strange calm settling over me. It all started with a box. A wooden box for a Rolex watch. Their expressions shifted almost comically. Confusion, then dawning recognition. That box you gave me for my 18th birthday. I continued. The one with the confetti cannon inside. Remember that? Everyone thought it was hilarious. Dad squirmed slightly. It was just a joke, Jake. You always took everything so seriously. Well, that joke turned out to be worth about $10 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient cafe noise seemed to fade away. Mom's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Dad's face went slack. Tyler looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. What are you talking about? Mom finally whispered. I told him the story. Finding the hidden compartment, discovering the 1933 Double Eagle, the Authentication, the auction. I kept it simple, unemotional, like reciting the steps of an engine rebuild. So your grandfather's practical joke became my treasure. I concluded. Poetic, isn't it? Dad's face had gone from pale to flushed. That's not. That can't be. The coin should belong to the family. I am family, I replied evenly, and you gave me the box, in front of witnesses, while filming it. But we didn't know what was inside. Mom protested. If we had known, you'd have kept it for yourselves. I finished for her. Or given it to Tyler. Yeah, I know. Tyler had been uncharacteristically quiet, staring into his untouched coffee. So that's why you bought that house. Started that business. You've been sitting on millions while the rest of you what? I cut in. Dad still has his banking job. Mom still teaches. You got Grandpa's house and car. What exactly are you struggling with? It's the principle, Dad insisted, his voice rising slightly. Henry was my father. That coin should have been part of my inheritance. A few heads turned our way, and Dad lowered his voice, leaning in. We're family, Jake. Family shares. Family takes care of each other. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not bitterly, just genuinely amused. Family takes care of each other? I repeated. Where was that sentiment when you were mocking my interests? When you gave Tyler everything Grandpa and I worked on together? When you turned the one memory I had of Grandpa into a joke? Mom reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I gently pulled back. Jake, honey, we made mistakes. We see that now. But surely you can find it in your heart to help your family? We're not asking for all of it, just a share. Tyler nodded eagerly. Yeah, like maybe $1 million each? You'd still have plenty left. The naked greed was almost refreshing in its honesty after the fake concern. We were just joking around back then. Dad added, a touch desperately. You can't punish us forever for one silly prank. I took a slow sip of my coffee, now gone slightly cold. A joke for $10 million? I mused. You guys should go into comedy professionally. Dad's face darkened. If that's your attitude, maybe we should talk to a lawyer. You were barely 18, living under our roof. We could make a case. No, I said simply. You couldn't. I've already had the best attorneys review the situation. The box was a gift, given publicly. The coin was legally mine to sell. There's no case to make. Dad deflated slightly, knowing I was right. In the background, a Muddy Waters song started playing over the cafe's sound system. It felt like Grandpa was there, nodding along, approving of how I was handling things. It's not right, Tyler muttered. You always were selfish. I looked at my brother, this person who had everything handed him his entire life, and felt no anger, just a profound disconnection. And you always took everything. I replied calmly. This time it was my turn. I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover the coffees. I didn't come here for your approval or to share my money. I came because I was curious if you'd changed. Now I have my answer. Mom's eyes welled with tears. Real or calculated, I couldn't tell anymore. Jake, please. I don't hate you, I told them, meaning it. I don't even blame you anymore. You are who you are, but I'm not that lonely kid desperate for your approval anymore. I'm the first in my own story, not the second in yours. With that, I walked out, feeling lighter than I had in years. The last thread tying me to my old life had finally been cut. The spring air outside felt clean and refreshing. I texted Emmy. On my way home, it went exactly as expected. That evening, Emmy and I sat on our deck watching the sunset over Lake Erie. I told her everything. Their shocked faces, their immediate pivot to demanding money, their threats of legal action. Are you okay? She asked, searching my face. I thought about it for a moment. Yeah, actually, I'm better than okay. I feel free. From them, from needing anything from them, from the part of me that still wanted them to be different. The next day, a small package arrived at the shop. Inside was a replica of the 1933 Double Eagle, a high-quality reproduction that Emmy had secretly ordered weeks ago. I thought you might want this, she said, placing it in my palm. As a reminder, I turned the golden disc over in my hand, feeling its weight. Thank you, Grandpa, I whispered. You taught me to be more than their jokes. You believed I had value when no one else did. Emmy smiled, taking the replica and placing it in a new wooden box she'd had custom-made, similar to the original Rolex box, but with our wedding date engraved inside the lid. For our son someday, she said, so he'll know what his great-grandfather was like. The thought of passing down Grandpa's legacy, not just in terms of wealth, but wisdom, filled me with a quiet joy I hadn't expected. 6 months later, on a warm summer evening, Emmy and I sat on the porch swing I'd installed on our deck. The breeze carried the scent of lake water and grilling from somewhere down the shore. A portable speaker played Sonny Boy Williamson, Grandpa's favorite. Our wedding bands caught the last golden rays of sunlight. Simple, traditional, like the promises we'd made to each other. Any regrets? Emmy asked, her head resting on my shoulder. I thought about the question, about the journey from that confetti-filled humiliation to this moment of peace, about the grandfather who saw something in me that my own parents couldn't, about the random twist of fate that had changed everything. Not a single one, I answered truthfully. The music played on, a soundtrack to a life I'd built on my own terms. The business was thriving. I was halfway through my engineering degree, and the woman beside me understood me in ways my biological family never had. Grandpa Henry's words came back to me, clearer than ever. Life's a road, Jake. You don't stop driving just because the tank feels empty. He'd been right about that, and so much more. Sometimes the road takes unexpected turns. Sometimes you break down and have to rebuild the engine, but you keep moving forward, keep finding your own way. Life is a road, I said softly to Emmy, and I'm finally on mine.